Recently, the NBA was rocked by the news of Bobby Portis being suspended for 25 games. On this occasion, I decided to take a closer look at the longest suspensions in the NBA history. The reasons for suspensions in the NBA have varied. We've had scandals involving game fixing while players were still in college, suspensions for fights, attacking coaches, bringing weapons into the locker room, using banned substances, and many other incidents. Of course, I won't be covering every single suspension today, otherwise we might not have enough time before the next season comes up. But I will highlight the most interesting cases from NBA history. Let's dive in. And let's start with lifetime bans. The first player to be permanently excluded from the NBA was John Drew, a forward for the Atlanta Hawks and Utah Jazz. Drew was a two-time All-Star who played over 700 games in the league, averaging more than 20 points per game. He was also one of the first NBA players to publicly struggle with cocaine addiction. In February 1983, the New York Times published an article detailing his problems. Drew admitted to the Utah Jazz that he had an issue, so the team sent him to rehab. In his interview with the Times, he revealed that his previous team, the Atlanta Hawks, had already sent him to rehab 3 times, but without any success. Unfortunately, Drew's addiction proved too strong. He relapsed twice and was permanently banned from the NBA in 1986. Soon after, he was arrested for selling cocaine to an undercover officer. His basketball career came to an end, and his life took a downward turn. Charles Barkley once mentioned that he saw Drew living as a homeless man in the 1990s. However, it seems that Drew eventually overcame his struggles. His personal website once stated that he had freed himself from drugs and was working as a taxi driver in Houston. He passed away in 2022 at the age of 67 due to bone cancer. In December 1987, the second player was permanently banned from the NBA. This time it was Eddie Johnson, not the one you might know from his time with the Phoenix Suns, who now works as a commentator. This Eddie Johnson also played for the Atlanta Hawks, just like John Drew, and was a two-time All-Star. He too struggled with cocaine addiction. His story is tragic. In 1980, he was reportedly running from 2 armed men during a drug-related dispute and had to jump from a second-story balcony. Just weeks later, he was arrested for cocaine possession. Eventually, he was diagnosed with depression. He was officially banned from the NBA in 1987, but his story didn't end there. Over the years, Johnson was arrested multiple times for crimes including burglary, assault, robbery, drug possession, and even assaulting a police officer. In 2006, he was arrested for child molestation. 2 years later, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He died in a Florida prison at the age of 65. The next cases weren't as tragic. Chris Washburn was selected 3rd overall in the 1986 NBA draft by the Golden State Warriors, 1 pick after Len Bias, who was drafted by the Boston Celtics but tragically died from a drug overdose. Washburn played just 72 games in NBA due to knee injuries and his own struggles with cocaine addiction. In June 1989, he was permanently banned from the NBA after failing 3 drug tests. Another player from that same draft was Roy Tarpley, a center who was named the NBA Sixth Man of the Year in his second season with the Dallas Mavericks. That was also the last year he played significant minutes. In the following years, he appeared in just 19, 45, and 5 games respectively. In 1989, he was arrested for driving under the influence of drugs and was suspended for the first time. In March 1991, he was suspended again for the same reason. He then played in Europe for 3 years before returning to the NBA in the 1994-95 season. He appeared in 55 games, proving to be a valuable player of the bench, averaging over 12 points and 8 rebounds per game. However, in December 1995, he was permanently banned from the NBA for violating his court-mandated probation and alcohol abuse. Richard Dumas was a highly talented forward who started for the Phoenix Suns in the 1993 NBA Finals against the Chicago Bulls. He was technically a rookie that season, only because he had spent the entire 91-92 year suspended for violating the NBA's drug policy. At that time, if a player failed a drug test before playing a single NBA game, they were automatically suspended for 1 year. Dumas spent that suspension playing in Israel for Hapoel Holon. When he returned in 1993, he had the best stretch of his NBA career. However, ahead of 93-94 season he was suspended again for failing drug tests and skipping rehab. He played just 15 games for the Suns in 1995 and 39 for the Sixers the following season. In 1996 he was permanently banned from the NBA. Finally, what was initially a 2-year suspension for OJ Mayo in 2016 ended up becoming a de facto lifetime ban. He was suspended in July 2016 for using marijuana and abusing banned painkillers. He was eligible to apply for reinstatement in 2018, but never returned to the NBA. Instead, he continued his career overseas, playing in Puerto Rico, Taiwan, China, Russia, and finally Egypt. He has not played professionally since 2022. The most recent lifetime ban in the NBA was for gambling. On April 17, 2024, Jontay Porter was suspended for violating the league's betting rules, placing wagers on his own stats, his health, and even sometimes against his own team. Porter later pleaded guilty in the US and is also facing charges in Canada as he was under contract with the Toronto Raptors at the time. Following his suspension, the NBA introduced the Jontay Porter rule, which prohibits sportsbooks from offering bets on individual statistics for players on 2-way or 10-day contracts. A fascinating case from the 1960s and 70s involved NBA legend Connie Hawkins. In his freshman year of college, Hawk was accused of being involved in a point-shaving scandal, where players manipulated the margin of victory without affecting the outcome. As a result, he was expelled from school. He then signed with the Pittsburgh Reds in the ABL, a league attempting to rival the NBA. He was the best player in that league, but after a season and a half, it folded. For the next 4 years, Hawkins played with the Harlem Globetrotters. When his draft class became eligible in 1964, no NBA team drafted him. In 1966, the league officially banned him for life. In response, Hawkins sued the NBA, seeking $6 million in damages, arguing that no concrete evidence had ever linked him to the scandal. He then played for the Pittsburgh Pipers in the ABA, winning both the league MVP and Finals MVP. Eventually, in 1969, the NBA settled with him for $1.3 million, equivalent to about $11 million today, and lifted his ban. Hawkins joined the Phoenix Suns and became a 4-time All-Star. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1992, and in 1996 he was portrayed by Joe Smith, the number 1 pick in the 1995 NBA Draft, in the film Rebound, The Legend of Earl the Goat Manigault. Michael Ray Richardson, Mitchell Wiggins, Louis Lloyd and Dwayne Washington were all suspended in the 1980s due to cocaine abuse, but they successfully appealed and returned to the NBA. A similar situation occurred with Stanley Roberts in the early 2000s. One of the most well-known cases in recent years involved Chris Birdman Anderson. He was suspended for 2 years, but managed to return and later won an NBA championship with the Miami Heat. Another notable case was Tyreke Evans, the 2010 Rookie of the Year, who edged out Stephen Curry in the voting. In May 2019, Evans was banned from the NBA for violating the league's anti-drug program. In February 2022, his appeal was granted, and he tried an NBA comeback. However, after playing just 2 games in the G League with the Wisconsin Herd, he was released, failing to reach the necessary level of play. He finished his career in Puerto Rico and Venezuela. The longest single suspension in NBA history was given to Ron Artest. You all know the story. November 2004, a game against the Detroit Pistons erupted into a massive brawl, later chronicled in a Netflix documentary. Artest fought with fans and was suspended for the remainder of the season and playoffs, totaling 86 games. He later requested a trade and was sent to the Sacramento Kings. Years later, he won an NBA championship with the Los Angeles Lakers. Other players involved in the same brawl also received suspensions. Steven Jackson got 30 games, Jermaine O'Neal 15 and Ben Wallace 6 games. Latrell Sprewell received a 68-game suspension for threatening, choking and punching his head coach PJ Carlesimo during a Golden State Warriors practice. Initially, the team suspended him for 10 games, then voided his contract and suspended him for a full year. However, upon appeal, his contract was reinstated, and his suspension was reduced from 82 to 68 games. He never played for the Warriors again, instead joining the New York Knicks in 1999, where he helped them to reach the NBA Finals. He later played for the Minnesota Timberwolves, leading them to a Western Conference Finals appearance. Another infamous case was Gilbert Arenas, who was suspended for 50 games after bringing an unloaded gun into the Washington Wizards locker room during a gambling dispute with the teammate Javaris Crittenton. Crittenton received a 38-game suspension. Years later, he was sentenced to 23 years in prison for a 2011 murder, though he was released in 2023 after serving 10 years. Nearly a decade ago, the NBA established a new policy for failed drug tests, a 25-game suspension. Players who have received this suspension include DeAndre Ayton, Jody Meeks, Wilson Chandler, John Collins, Didi Luzada, Tristan Thompson and Bobby Portis, whom we started this discussion with. One of the most recent 25-game bans went to Ja Morant. Everyone remembers this case. He was repeatedly seen on social media brandishing a gun, leading to his suspension. He was required to undergo rehab and counseling. Combined with a previous 8-game suspension for similar behavior, he has served a total of 33 games in suspensions. There have been numerous suspensions in NBA history, though most were shorter than 25 games. The longest suspension for an on-court fight, excluding artists, went to Carmelo Anthony. On December 16, 2006, he punched Mardy Collins of the New York Knicks in the face, resulting in a 15-game suspension. J.R. Smith and Nate Robinson received 10-game suspensions, while Collins was suspended for 6 games. Dennis Rodman was suspended for 17 games across 2 separate incidents. In March 1996, he had batted a referee after being ejected from a game against the New Jersey Nets, leading to a 6-game suspension. Then, in January 1997, he kicked a cameraman in the groin during a game against the Minnesota Timberwolves. Though the incident was initially overlooked, 2 days later he was suspended for 11 games. One of the most infamous cases involved Vernon Maxwell. In February 1995, during a game against the Portland Trail Blazers, he ran into the stands and punched a fan in the face for allegedly heckling him. He was suspended for 10 games. A week later, the Houston Rockets traded for Clyde Drexler. Maxwell clashed with the team, skipped the playoffs and was not part of their second championship run. This wasn't the first suspension of Bobby Portis' career. Back in October 2017, while with the Chicago Bulls, he punched teammate Nikola Mirotic during practice. Mirotic suffered a concussion and a facial fracture, while Portis was suspended for 8 games. That wraps up today's video. Huge thanks for watching. Be sure to comment below and I'll see you next one. Bye!